I used to think betrayal happened in locked bedrooms or through text messages hidden under face-down screens. I was wrong. Real betrayal wears a tailored suit, walks into a courtroom, places a hand on the Bible, and lets your own parents testify that you are the toxic one. When my mother looked at the judge and said, "She has always been dangerously cold," my marriage didn't just end. My family executed my character. 2 years later, I found the proof. My name is Caroline Hamilton. I am 38 years old, and for the first 3 decades of my existence, I operated under the fundamental delusion that if you simply did the right thing, kept your head down, and built a sturdy enough foundation, your house would never collapse. I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, residing in a quiet, affluent neighborhood where the driveways were always immaculately swept and the hydrangea bushes were meticulously pruned to present a perfect face to the street. We were comfortably upper middle class, existing in that heavily curated space where money was never considered an emergency, but was instead a quiet, constant hum of conversation behind closed mahogany doors. Yet, in the Hamilton household, the basic laws of physics simply did not apply. Gravity did not pull objects toward the earth. Everything, absolutely everything, revolved around the blinding center of our family universe, my older sister, Evangeline. Everyone called her Eva. Eva was the sun. She possessed the kind of effortless, terrifying beauty that immediately rearranged the molecular structure of any room the second she stepped through the door. She was articulate, radiant, and armed with a preternatural ability to make everyone she met feel as though they were the most fascinating person she had ever encountered. People gravitated to her, eager to bask in her warmth. I, on the other hand, was the anchor dropped in deep water. I was reserved, fiercely practical, and painfully aware of the long dark shadows cast by Eva's blinding light. From a very young age, my role within the family ecosystem was strictly and permanently defined. I was the reliable one. In the twisted dictionary of our family dynamics, the word reliable was merely a polite, acceptable synonym for being completely invisible right up until the exact moment there was a mess that needed cleaning up. The defining moment of our respective trajectories, the memory that cemented the bitter reality of my place in the hierarchy, occurred when I was in my early 20s. Eva had managed to burn through her entire, substantial college fund, an impressive feat she achieved by transferring universities 2 times and changing her major 3 separate times. When she finally moved back home into her old redecorated childhood bedroom with nothing but a half-finished degree in art history and a trunk overflowing with expensive designer clothes, my parents did not yell. They did not sit her down for a stern lecture about responsibility. My mother simply smoothed Eva's perfect hair, sighed sympathetically, and told the neighbors over Sunday brunch that our dear Eva was just taking some time for finding herself. 2 years later, I found a specialized risk management certification program that would practically guarantee me a promotion at my entry-level corporate job. I had diligently saved up 80% of the tuition by working overtime, but I was short by a couple of $1,000s. When I sat at the kitchen island and asked my parents for a very small loan, promising to pay it back with interest within 6 months, my father gave me a tight and trebly proud smile. "Caroline, you have always been our rock," he said, gently patting my folded hands. "We know you will figure it out on your own. You need to remain independent, just like always." I did not argue with them. I had learned long ago that arguing with my parents about Eva was like trying to negotiate with a brick wall. I just nodded, stood up, walked out of the kitchen, and made a silent, unbreakable promise to myself right then and there. I would never ask them for a single thing ever again. Instead of feeling sorry for myself, I channeled my quiet fury into my career. I threw myself into my work with a singular, cold desperation. I did not just want financial stability, I wanted an impenetrable fortress of my own making. Over the next decade, I ruthlessly climbed the corporate ladder until I became the director of contract risk at Blue Mesa Infrastructure Partners, a massive, highly respected infrastructure firm based in Charlotte. My job was not glamorous. My daily routine consisted of looking at multi-million-dollar construction bids, dissecting every single obscure clause, and identifying every conceivable way things could go terribly wrong for the company. I read the fine print for a living. I anticipated disaster before it ever had a chance to materialize. It was a high-pressure, incredibly grueling existence, often demanding 60 to 70 hours a week of pure, uninterrupted focus. But the income was substantial. The respect I commanded was real, and more importantly, it was entirely mine. I had built it with my own two hands, asking nothing from anyone. And then, I met Declan Pierce. The encounter happened at a local architectural charity fundraiser that my firm was sponsoring. I was standing near the back of the lavishly decorated banquet hall, mentally calculating how many minutes I had to stay before I could reasonably leave and go back to my spreadsheets, when he approached me. He handed me a glass of club soda with a lime wedge. Having somehow noticed from across the room that I was politely refusing the cheap wine being passed around by the waiters. Declan was an entirely different species from the aggressive corporate men I dealt with daily. He was charming without being arrogant, sophisticated but entirely unpretentious. He ran a small, boutique interior design studio. It was not wildly profitable, but he possessed a deep, genuine passion for textures, natural light, and spatial flow. What captivated me most, however, was the incredibly focused way he looked at me. When you work 70 hours a week and spend your entire adult life anticipating other people's catastrophic failures, you inevitably become something of a machine. Declan pierced right through that armor. He made me feel like a woman. He made me feel genuinely, profoundly seen. "I love how still you are," he told me on our third date, reaching across the candlelit table to gently trace the delicate line of my wrist with his index finger. "Everyone else in my industry is constantly shouting, constantly performing just to get noticed. You don't need to perform to stand out. Caroline, you just are." I fell in love with him in the quiet, steady, practical way I did everything else in my life. Our marriage felt like a monumental, late-in-life reward for decades of quiet endurance and second-place finishes. We bought a beautiful mid-century modern house in a leafy, quiet suburb of Charlotte, a property that Declan spent 18 months meticulously renovating to match his exacting standards. Our life together settled into a series of comfortable, beautiful routines. I would often come home late from Blue Mesa, exhausted to my bones and smelling of stale office coffee. And Declan would have a late-night dinner waiting warmly on the stove. We would sit together at the massive quartz kitchen island, drinking heavy red wine and talking softly about the triumphs and frustrations of our respective days. We talked earnestly about having children, tentatively setting the grand plan aside year after year because my work schedule was always too demanding to accommodate a pregnancy. But the glowing hope was always there, suspended in the quiet air between us like a beautiful promise waiting to be fulfilled. For the first time in my entire existence, I felt truly safe. I looked around my beautifully designed home, gazing at my loving, fiercely attentive husband, and at the deeply satisfying life I had carved out of the solid rock of my own relentless ambition. I let out a long, heavy breath I suddenly realized I had been holding since my childhood in Asheville. I had finally done it. I had successfully built an entire world where I was the main character. I had created a private, secure universe where Evangeline was nowhere near the center. It was a beautiful, comforting, intoxicating belief. And it was precisely that deep, abiding belief in my own untouchable sanctuary that would make the impending betrayal hurt twice as much, tearing through my life with the violent force of a hurricane. The return of Eva did not begin with an apology or a moment of quiet reflection. It began with a chaotic, spectacular implosion in Charleston. She had been engaged to a man whose family owned half the commercial real estate on the peninsula. The engagement ended in a highly public disaster involving a thrown diamond ring and a screaming match at a prestigious country club. She returned to Charlotte with a trunk full of designer luggage and a practiced, devastating look of delicate tragedy. "I just need to be near family for a little while," she whispered softly in my foyer on a rainy Tuesday evening, smelling of expensive perfume and manufactured victimhood. My parents reacted exactly as I had anticipated. They treated her arrival like the triumphant return of a wounded war hero. They hovered around her. They coddled her. And they implicitly demanded that I do the exact same thing, despite every instinct in my body screaming at me to keep my distance. I allowed her free access to my home. I told myself I was simply avoiding a pointless, exhausting battle with my mother. In reality, I was making the fatal mistake of believing my personal sanctuary was too solid to be breached by something as fragile as my sister's ego. The true danger did not announce itself with a warning siren. It disguised itself as harmless compatibility. Initially, I thought Declan and Eva would merely tolerate each other. Declan was a working professional who valued structure. Eva was a professional socialite who thrived on chaos. But I was entirely wrong. They clicked with a synchronized rhythm that immediately set my teeth on edge. They shared a very specific, high-end aesthetic. They could spend 2 hours passionately debating the subtle textural differences between French and Belgian linen. They possessed the exact same palate for dry, heavily oaked red wines. Worst of all, they shared a biting, cynical brand of humor that I had never appreciated. Declan would make a sharp, slightly mean observation about a neighbor's landscaping, and Eva would burst into a bright, ringing laugh, tossing her perfect hair back. It was a loud, uninhibited sound that I realized I had not heard from my husband in a very long time. I was the bridge that had brought them together. But watching them interact in my own living room, I suddenly felt like a toll booth they had completely bypassed. Eva did not just want to be a charming guest in my home. She wanted to be a benefactor. She quickly identified the slight financial struggles of Declan's boutique design studio and expertly framed herself as his ultimate savior. "You are simply too talented to be doing mid-level kitchen remodels for suburbanites, Declan," she declared one evening, casually swirling her wineglass. "I know absolutely everyone in the charity and gallery circuits here. I can get your portfolio in front of people who do not flinch at a 6-figure consulting fee." Declan was mesmerized. The prospect of breaking into the ultra-wealthy market was his ultimate professional dream. He began praising her relentlessly, even when she was not in the room. "Your sister is an absolute force of nature," he would say, his eyes shining with a strange, frantic energy as he paced our bedroom. "She has this incredible instinctual eye for networking. We are so lucky she decided to stay." I would nod slowly, forcing a tight, agreeable smile, trying to swallow the suffocating feeling that his gratitude was rapidly mutating into something resembling worship. Our quiet, intimate family dinners slowly transformed into theatrical performances. The massive quartz kitchen island, where Declan and I used to share our tired, honest conversations after long workdays, became a brilliantly lit stage. Eva and Declan were the lead actors, volleying inside jokes, obscure design concepts, and socialite gossip back and forth with dizzying speed. I was relegated to the role of a silent audience member, sitting rigidly on my expensive bar stool, nursing a single glass of water. They would talk over me, around me, and through me. If I tried to interject a practical comment about my day dealing with risk assessments and contract liabilities, the energy in the room would visibly drop. They would politely pause, give me a thin, patronizing smile, and then immediately dive right back into their shared, exclusive wavelength. I paid the mortgage on the room we were sitting in, yet I had never felt more like a stranger trespassing on private property. The betrayal did not arrive in a grand, dramatic confession. It bled into my life through 1,000 tiny, agonizing micro-details. I am a woman trained to look for hidden anomalies in massive stacks of corporate paperwork, so I naturally began to notice the subtle, jarring shifts in my own house. The most glaring change was the physical geometry of Declan's cellular phone. For 4 years, he had casually tossed his phone face up on the counter. Suddenly, it was always placed face down, always. Then came the evening Eva walked over to our liquor cabinet and casually poured him a glass of rye. Not his usual, reliable bourbon, but a specific, rare, incredibly spicy rye that I did not even realize we possessed. He prefers the sharp finish on a Thursday, she said lightly, not even bothering to look in my direction as she handed him the heavy crystal glass. He took it without a word, his fingers lightly brushing hers. It is a profoundly terrifying experience to stand in your own kitchen and realize another woman has meticulously memorized the hidden geography of your husband's desires. The breaking point. The moment the invisible tension finally materialized into something tangible. Happened on a Thursday night. I had been in Atlanta for a grueling week of corporate contract negotiations and managed to catch an earlier flight back to Charlotte, arriving home 2 days ahead of schedule. It was exactly 11 o'clock at night. The house was completely dark and utterly silent. Declan was fast asleep in our master bedroom. I carried my suitcase upstairs, feeling a desperate need to wash the stale airport smell off my business suit. I walked into our laundry room and flipped on the harsh fluorescent light. There, draped perfectly over my wooden drying rack, was Eva's pale pink cashmere sweater. It was the exact same sweater she had been wearing in a photograph she posted online that very afternoon, alongside a caption claiming she was spending the entire night at a friend's beach house 3 hours away. My heart did not race. It simply stopped, freezing into a solid, heavy block of ice in my chest. I stood in the harsh overhead light, staring at the soft, expensive fabric, mentally mapping out the logistical impossibility of its presence in my home. The next morning, I confronted Declan over coffee. I kept my voice perfectly level, presenting the situation like a piece of questionable evidence in a boardroom. He did not blink. His heart rate did not appear to elevate in the slightest. She spilled a latte on herself when she stopped by to drop off some velvet swatches yesterday afternoon. Caroline, he said smoothly, pouring his dark roast coffee with a remarkably steady hand. She washed it and left it to dry. You are acting completely paranoid. This is exactly what happens when you work 80-hour weeks. You become exhausted. You lose your grip on reality. And you start seeing ghosts where there are none. He delivered the lie with such practiced, effortless conviction that it chilled me to the absolute bone. He expertly weaponized my ambition, turning my own punishing work ethic and physical exhaustion into an indictment of my sanity. I had no hard, actionable proof. In my professional life, I dealt entirely in signed contracts, undeniable digital trails, and ironclad clauses. Here, in the ruins of my personal life, I had absolutely nothing but a face-down phone, a glass of rare rye whiskey, and a damp piece of cashmere. But my instincts, honed by years of sniffing out corporate deceit, were screaming at a deafening volume. I could feel the invisible, suffocating architecture of a secret language being constructed right in the middle of my marriage. I realized then that my deepest fear was no longer simply being the last person to find out the truth. My absolute, paralyzing terror was that I was the only person in the entire world who was explicitly forbidden from knowing it. It was a late Tuesday evening, just minutes shy of midnight. The rhythmic, heavy drumming of the shower water echoed from the master bathroom, a mundane and domestic sound that served as the background noise to the complete and total collapse of my universe. I was sitting rigidly upright in bed, reviewing a dense 60-page vendor liability contract, when the screen of Declan's tablet, resting casually on his mahogany nightstand, flared to life with a bright, invasive glow. I had never been the kind of wife who monitored her husband's digital footprint. However, the preview banner locked on the lock screen was entirely legible, and the text burned itself directly into my retinas. It was an email notification from a secure, anonymous server I did not recognize, bearing a subject line that shattered the air in the room, draft timeline before filing. My professional instincts, sharpened over a decade of dissecting hostile corporate takeovers and anticipating catastrophic breach of contract disputes, instantly overrode any lingering sense of marital privacy. I reached across the expanse of the bed and picked up the tablet. The numerical passcode was simply his mother's birth year, a deeply predictable combination he had never bothered to update. I tapped the 4 numbers in. What I discovered waiting in that inbox was not a passionate, tear-stained confession of forbidden love. It was a business proposal. It was a meticulously structured, multi-phase strategic plan designed by my husband and my sister to dismantle my marriage and extract the maximum possible financial yield from its wreckage. I scrolled through the lengthy email chain, my breathing remaining shallow and perfectly even. Eva had drafted a long paragraph detailing my intense work schedule, concluding with the biting observation that I was simply too busy and too arrogant to notice anything happening right in front of my face. Declan's response, sent 2 days prior, outlined a highly calculated legal maneuver. He explicitly stated that because my corporate income was vastly higher than his fluctuating studio earnings, he needed to establish a solid narrative of himself as an emotionally abused, financially controlled spouse. If we build the image of me suffering under her mental domination, he typed, it gives me maximum leverage during the final asset division. They were not simply having a torrid affair behind my back. They were actively auditing my life, looking for structural weaknesses to exploit in a court of law. The sickness pooling at the bottom of my stomach was utterly clinical. I did not shed a single tear. I navigated away from the email application and opened his photo library. I bypassed the innocent main grid of architectural sketches and dog pictures, scrolling directly down to the hidden album section. Another security prompt appeared. I typed in the 4 digits of our wedding anniversary. Access was immediately granted. There were over 200 files locked inside. I stared at high-resolution photographs of Declan and Eva, smiling warmly in front of a rustic weekend cabin rental in the mountains. A trip he had claimed he was taking entirely alone to scout salvaged timber for a client. I found scanned images of expensive hotel room service receipts totaling hundreds of dollars. There was a close-up, artistic shot of their wrists resting side by side on a leather steering wheel, showcasing matching braided silver bracelets. The steering wheel belonged to my imported luxury vehicle, an expensive car I had paid off almost entirely with my year-end corporate bonus just 3 months prior. They were taking smiling selfies in the driver's seat of an asset I owned, wearing jewelry purchased with money I had likely earned. Then, I located the audio file. It was a recorded voice memo, time-stamped from the previous Friday afternoon. I pressed the play icon, holding the tablet speaker inches from my ear to ensure I could hear them clearly over the sound of the running shower. Declan's voice filtered through the speaker, sounding relaxed, entitled, and deeply aggrieved. I have endured this Ice Queen routine for long enough, he murmured smoothly. A soft, bright, and intimately familiar laugh followed. It was Eva. Just hold on a little bit longer, she replied, her tone dangerously practical and devoid of any guilt. If we just get Mom and Dad to go on the record saying Caroline has always been fundamentally cold, prone to random anger, and fiercely controlling with the family money, the judge will not even hesitate. They will lean right toward our side. The recording ended, plunging the bedroom back into the sound of rushing water. The silence in my head, however, was deafening. The parameters of the betrayal had just exponentially expanded. My own mother and father were not just going to be passive, heartbroken bystanders in this affair. They had been pre-selected as the star character witnesses for the prosecution. A normal wife would have hurled the tablet against the bathroom door, shattering the glass and demanding answers. A normal wife would have screamed until her vocal cords tore. I did neither of those things. I am a woman who survives by securing the evidentiary record. Adrenaline, cold and sharp as winter air, flooded my veins, pushing out the grief and replacing it with pure, tactical focus. I immediately initiated disaster mitigation. I systematically took high-resolution screenshots of every single email, every damning photograph, every hotel receipt, and the visual audio transcript. I wirelessly transferred the entire payload of digital files to my own encrypted external hard drive. The heavy-duty one I reserved exclusively for highly classified corporate mergers. I created a secure, untraceable email account right there on my mobile phone and forwarded the voice memo and the most crucial documents into a secure cloud server. I established a flawless, undeniable chain of custody before Declan even turned off the hot water. By the time he strolled out of the bathroom, drying his dark hair with a fluffy white towel and flashing me a relaxed smile. The tablet was sitting exactly where he had left it, the screen completely dark, the digital vault securely locked. I waited until the sun came up. I let him sleep peacefully beside me, feeling the warmth radiating from his body and knowing with absolute certainty that it belonged to an enemy combatant. When morning finally broke, I walked downstairs and brewed a pot of black coffee. He strolled into the kitchen 20 minutes later, wearing his perfectly tailored gray sweatpants, looking exactly like the charming, sensitive artist I had married. I did not offer him a mug. I stood rooted on the opposite side of the massive quartz island. I looked directly into his brown eyes and recited, word for word, the exact contents of his hidden email regarding his strategic plan for our asset division. I watched his face closely. I waited for the sudden panic. I waited for the frantic apologies, the desperate backpedaling, the pathetic begging that historically accompanies a discovered betrayal. It never arrived. Declan's expression froze for a fraction of a second, a tiny glitch in his performance. But then, his entire physical demeanor shifted. The charming, vulnerable artist completely vanished, replaced by a man who was hard, calculated, and entirely ruthless. He did not utter a single syllable of remorse. He leaned forward, placing both of his hands flat and heavy on the marble surface. "I have loved Ava for a very long time," he stated flatly, his voice devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "We connect on a level you could never possibly understand. You are just spinning out of control right now because, for the first time in your tightly managed, obsessive existence, you cannot micromanage the outcome. You are going crazy because I am finally breaking out of your corporate prison." He was actively rewriting reality right in front of my face. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his pivot left me momentarily speechless. Our marriage did not conclude with a tearful breakdown or a shattered plate thrown against the kitchen wall. It ended with a brilliantly executed, ice-cold ultimatum. Declan straightened his posture, looking down at me with an expression of manufactured, sickening pity. "If you try to make a scene out of this, Caroline," he warned, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register that I had never heard before. "If you try to humiliate us or drag this out in public, I will tell everyone the absolute truth. I will tell them exactly what your parents already know. I will tell the entire world that you are a rigid, suffocating tyrant who systematically crushed my spirit for years. I will make sure everyone knows that you drove me away." He turned on his heel and walked calmly out of the kitchen, leaving his coffee untouched on the counter. I stood perfectly still, the cold porcelain of the kitchen island pressing hard against my palms. I understood in that exact moment that the affair was merely the prologue, the actual destruction, the systematic execution of my character and my life, was only just beginning. Declan did not waste a single second. Less than 48 hours after he issued his chilling ultimatum in our kitchen, the legal machinery was set into motion. I was standing in the glass-walled executive boardroom at Blue Mesa Infrastructure Partners, preparing to lead a quarterly risk assessment meeting, when a process server in a cheap gray suit handed me a thick, heavy manila envelope. Inside, Declan had officially filed the petition for the dissolution of our marriage. He did not simply want out, he wanted a total, scorched earth victory. The documents included an aggressive motion for temporary spousal support, a demand for the exclusive right to occupy our marital home throughout the legal proceedings, and a deeply disturbing sworn affidavit. In his meticulously crafted statement, Declan painted a terrifying, unrecognizable portrait of me. I was described in legally binding ink as a clinically cold, financially abusive, and domineering spouse who frequently suffered from unpredictable, terrifying bouts of rage. Eva moved into my house exactly 2 days later. She told our mutual acquaintances and the neighbors that she was simply providing vital emotional support for her devastated, fragile brother-in-law. Yet, when she eventually took the witness stand under oath weeks later, she possessed the breathtaking audacity to look the judge squarely in the eye and claims she only dropped by a couple of times a week out of pure, innocent concern for his well-being. I foolishly thought my parents might demand answers or at least ask to hear my side of the story. Instead, they formed an immediate, impenetrable defensive wall around Ava and Declan. When I tried to call my mother that first weekend to explain what was truly happening, she cut me off within 60 seconds. "You have always been much too rigid, Caroline." She sighed heavily into the receiver, her voice dripping with disappointed condescension. "You never knew how to soften yourself for a man. You push people away with your constant need for control." My father did not even grant me a phone call. He sent a single, formal email implying that my corporate career had completely stripped me of my basic human capacity to love, and that he fully supported Eva in her noble effort to help Declan recover from my emotional tyranny. The absolute swiftness of their betrayal was paralyzing. The preliminary hearing took place in a sterile, heavily wood-paneled courtroom in downtown Charlotte. The air inside felt impossibly thick, suffocating me the exact moment I crossed the threshold. Declan had hired a ruthless, highly theatrical attorney who treated the courtroom like a Broadway stage. His opening maneuver was to submit an official letter from a licensed psychological counselor. Declan had apparently attended exactly 3 private therapy sessions over the past 2 months, based entirely on those highly curated, one-sided conversations. The therapist wrote that my husband exhibited severe, textbook symptoms of emotional exhaustion and psychological battering within his marriage. Declan's lawyer wielded that single piece of paper like a bloody murder weapon, waving it in the air as he described the invisible prison I had allegedly built around his client. But the true ambush, the tactical strike that completely crippled my defense, came in the form of a digital audio file. The opposing attorney pressed play on a silver laptop, and the courtroom speakers amplified my own voice, heavily distorted and echoing off the wooden walls. "If you do not do exactly what I say, I will ruin you," the voice screamed. It was my voice. My heart plummeted entirely into my stomach, turning into a block of lead. It sounded like a deranged, abusive threat from a monster. In reality, it was a heavily spliced and maliciously manipulated recording taken from a chaotic, heated argument we had nearly a year prior regarding a negligent roofing contractor who had severely damaged our property. But in that crucial, fast-paced first hearing, the complex digital metadata of the audio file was never analyzed. My lawyer, caught entirely off guard by the manufactured evidence, could not immediately prove it was a forgery. To the presiding judge, it simply sounded exactly like the terrifying, unchecked rage Declan had perfectly outlined in his affidavit. I sat completely frozen at the respondent's table, my hands folded so tightly in my lap that my knuckles turned completely white. I was forced to endure the absolute surreal nightmare of my own family actively rewriting my entire existence for the legal record. I listened in silent horror as my biological mother took the witness stand. She softly, sadly detailed how I obsessively controlled every single dime in the household, conveniently omitting the vital fact that I was the only person actually earning those dimes. I watched my sister perform a flawless masterpiece of a testimony. Eva dabbed her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue, playing the heartbroken, reluctant witness who had helplessly watched her beloved brother-in-law wither away under my iron fist. And I watched Declan. He was a maestro of silent suffering. He cried at the exact right emotional beats, a single tear rolling down his cheek when my mother spoke about his supposed depression. He stared down at his folded hands in tragic, stoic silence whenever my name was mentioned. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. The judge, an older woman with a stern, deeply lined face, absorbed this carefully constructed diorama of domestic abuse and made her decision. When she read the temporary orders, and subsequently the final divorce decree months later, the words hit me like physical blows to the skull. The picture painted by my husband, my sister, and my parents had been too cohesive, too perfectly orchestrated for the court to doubt. I was legally ordered to pay a staggering amount of spousal support to Declan every single month for a period of 5 long years. The final asset division was heavily skewed in his favor. severely penalizing me for my higher income and my alleged cruel misconduct. The most brutal, humiliating strike of all was the housing order. I was legally forced to vacate the beautiful mid-century home I had funded and maintained, while Declan was granted the exclusive right to remain there, effectively keeping the house I had built. I walked out of the heavy double doors of the courtroom feeling completely hollowed out, as if my internal organs had been surgically removed without anesthesia. The bright fluorescent lights of the long hallway buzzed with a sickening, mechanical hum. A few yards ahead of me, near the elevator bank, the victorious party was already quietly celebrating their windfall. Ava wrapped her arms tightly around Declan's neck in a deep, lingering embrace that was far too intimate for a sister-in-law. Over his shoulder, she caught my eye. Her expression was a sickening, unforgettable cocktail of manufactured pity and absolute, undeniable triumph. My parents walked right past me. They did not pause. They did not attempt to speak to me. They brushed past my shoulder, their eyes fixed straight ahead, treating me as if I were a dangerous stranger who had violently defiled their pristine family name. Standing there alone in the cold, echoing corridor, listening to the chime of the elevator doors opening for them, I realized the horrifying magnitude of what had just occurred. I had not merely been betrayed in a marriage. I had been publicly executed, legally stripped of my hard-earned assets, and permanently erased from my own family tree by the very people who shared my blood. They had written a fictional story about a monster, and the court had officially stamped it as the truth. I relocated to a minimalist, high-rise apartment situated 32 floors above the chaotic streets of the city center. It was a space composed entirely of polished concrete, soundproof glass, and sharp, unforgiving angles. It lacked the warmth of the suburban home I had meticulously funded, but warmth was no longer a metric I valued. I craved altitude and isolation. I changed my phone number, established strict filtering rules on my personal email accounts, and severed nearly every remaining tie to my bloodline. I wrapped myself tightly in a cloak of absolute silence. Work became my religion. At Blue Mesa Infrastructure Partners, I did not merely survive. I evolved into a weapon. The corporation handed me a convoluted, highly contentious chain of municipal transit contracts that had been stalling for 18 months. I locked myself in my corner office and treated those hundreds of pages of legal jargon as if they were a battlefield. Contracts possessed a beautiful, undeniable logic. A clause was either legally binding or it was void. A financial penalty was either enforceable or it was not. Paperwork could not lie to my face. It could not conspire against me in the dark. And it certainly could not stand in a courtroom and weep manufactured tears. I dismantled the risk profiles with a ruthless, clinical efficiency that genuinely frightened some of the senior partners. I caught loopholes that entire teams of external lawyers had missed. 12 months after the divorce decree was signed, the board of directors promoted me to vice president of risk mitigation. They rewarded my utter lack of sentimentality with a corner office and a compensation package that firmly secured my financial independence. I also attended cognitive behavioral therapy for 2 hours every single Tuesday evening. I did not sit in that leather armchair to cry about my failed marriage. Nor did I seek a gentle space to forgive the people who had actively destroyed my reputation. I went to therapy to forge my mind into cold, impenetrable steel. I needed to ensure that the profound public humiliation I had endured on the witness stand did not metastasize into a permanent, crippling bitterness. My therapist helped me compartmentalize the trauma, teaching me how to look at the wreckage of my past not as a personal failure, but as a catastrophic structural collapse caused by faulty external materials. I learned to live with the scar tissue without letting it dictate my movements. Charlotte is a sprawling metropolitan area, yet the specific social circles of wealth and architectural influence are suffocatingly small. Information always bleeds through the cracks. I did not have to actively search for updates on my former husband and my sister. The gossip was hand-delivered to me by well-meaning but incredibly clumsy acquaintances. I learned that Declan and Eva went entirely public with their relationship a mere 14 days after the judge banged her gavel. There was no respectful period of quiet separation. Instead, they hosted a spectacularly lavish, catered launch party at a downtown art gallery to unveil their brand new, jointly owned boutique design firm. Photographs circulated widely on social media platforms. They posed holding crystal glasses of vintage champagne, smiling brilliantly for the cameras, openly framing the brutal slaughter of my life as the tragic but entirely necessary prologue to their epic, creative romance. They believed they had won the war. 24 months slowly ticked by. The court-mandated spousal support payments automatically transferred out of my checking account on the first morning of every single month. It was a parasitic drain that I aggressively trained my brain to ignore, treating it like a fixed utility bill for a property I no longer inhabited. I genuinely believed the grave was sealed tight, and the earth above it had finally settled. Then, the dormant communication channel suddenly flared to life. It began with a highly irregular, stammering voicemail from my mother left on my office phone line. 3 days later, a rambling, deeply evasive email from my father bypassed my spam filters. Even a distant aunt, a woman I had not spoken to in 7 years, suddenly found the overwhelming urge to send me a direct message inquiring about my health. I did not respond to a single one of them. However, the sudden coordinated barrage of attention triggered my professional instincts. I quietly ran a few basic financial background checks using public, open-source records. The truth I uncovered was a magnificent, almost poetic disaster. The visionary design studio that Declan and Ava had launched with such arrogant fanfare was rapidly sinking into an ocean of insurmountable corporate debt. The breathtaking, industrial chic luxury loft they incessantly flaunted in magazine spreads was currently navigating the final, aggressive stages of bank foreclosure. They had completely burned through their initial capital, alienated their high-end client base with their chaotic management style, and defaulted on several major vendor loans. And, in the most predictable twist of the entire saga, my parents had quietly leveraged their heavily protected retirement portfolio, taking out a massive second mortgage on their Asheville estate just to help their golden child get back on her feet one more time. The entire family structure was financially hemorrhaging. When I finally decided to listen to the accumulated voicemails, I realized what truly chilled me to the bone. Across all the desperate messages, there was not a single, solitary syllable of apology. No one expressed any remorse for the perjured testimony. No one acknowledged the stolen assets. No one mentioned the horrific lies they had cemented into the public record. They simply reverted, instantly and flawlessly, to the ancient family script. "Caroline, we hear you are doing exceptionally well at the new position." My mother's voice trembled through the speaker, adopting that familiar, cloying tone of expectant demand. "You have always been the capable one. You have always known how to navigate these financial rough patches. You simply cannot let your own flesh and blood face total bankruptcy over some silly misunderstandings from the past. You need to look past your pride and be the bigger person." It was a rainy Thursday evening. I stood alone in my dark, silent living room, watching the heavy droplets of water streak across the floor-to-ceiling glass, blurring the vibrant city lights below. I opened my digital banking application on my phone and stared at the exact, cumulative sum of money I had been legally forced to transfer to Declan over the past 2 years. In that quiet, solitary moment, the final, lingering remnants of my grief entirely evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a crystalline, absolute clarity. I realized that the thing I hated the most was no longer the physical affair. It was not the loss of the house, and it was not even the humiliation in the courtroom. The true source of my deepest, most violent anger was the breathtaking, towering arrogance of their assumption. After everything they had systematically done to destroy me, after actively participating in my legal execution, they still possessed the audacity to believe I would simply step right back into my designated role. They genuinely believed that I was still the mindless, reliable workhorse, waiting patiently in the shadows, entirely ready to throw myself into the freezing water to act as their life raft. They thought I had survived the fire just so I could come back and keep them warm. The turning point did not arrive with a dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession. It arrived disguised as a mundane clerical error. I was sorting through a stack of forwarded mail in the sterile lobby of my high-rise building when I noticed a thick official-looking envelope from the county tax assessor. It had been routed to my new address by an automated postal glitch. But the property in question was my former marital home. I almost threw it directly into the recycling bin. I had surrendered that house to the court, and I had no desire to look at its property taxes. However, my eyes caught the name printed above the address line. It was not addressed to my former husband. It was addressed to a corporate entity, Pierce & Hart Atelier Holdings, Limited Liability Company. My professional instincts, honed by years of sniffing out corporate shell games and obscured assets, instantly flared to life. Normal people throw away misdelivered mail. Risk mitigation directors do not. I carried the envelope upstairs to my apartment, dropped my briefcase on the floor, and opened my laptop. I logged into the Secretary of State's online business registry, paid the nominal $25 search fee, and pulled the unredacted formation documents for the company. The digital paperwork loaded on my screen, and the air in my apartment seemed to turn to ice. The company had been officially incorporated exactly 3 months before my husband filed the initial divorce petition. I scrolled down to the signatory page. There were 2 managing members listed. The first signature was a familiar, sharp scrawl belonging to my ex-husband. The second signature, sitting right next to it in looping, elegant blue ink, belonged to my sister. I leaned closer to the monitor, my heart beating in a slow, heavy rhythm. I pulled the attached property deeds linked to the corporate entity. They had not just registered a business at my old address. The public records clearly showed that Pierce & Hart Atelier Holdings had recently executed a massive commercial real estate transaction. They had purchased the sprawling luxury downtown loft. During the entire divorce proceeding, they had publicly flaunted that loft on social media. But in the courtroom, my ex-husband swore under oath that it was merely a temporary, expensive rental they were struggling to afford. The deed proved otherwise. It was a purchase, and it required a colossal, 6-figure cash down payment to secure the mortgage. The sheer magnitude of the lie hit me like a physical shockwave. During the financial discovery phase of our divorce, my husband had submitted a sworn, notarized affidavit to the judge. He explicitly declared that he possessed absolutely no liquid assets, that his design studio was drowning in debt, and that he desperately required my spousal support just to survive. He had committed textbook, undeniable perjury. He had lied to a judge to steal my money, while secretly sitting on a mountain of hidden capital with my sister. The immediate question was the source of the capital. They did not simply manifest that kind of money out of thin air. I walked to my hall closet and pulled down a heavy plastic storage bin containing my meticulously archived financial records from the final year of our marriage. I spread the bank statements across my kitchen island, tracing the columns with my index finger. I went back to the exact month the corporate entity was formed. I aligned the dates, and the final puzzle piece locked into place with a sickening snap. During the last 6 months of our marriage, we had been building a joint savings fund to execute a massive structural renovation on the back half of our property. The money had slowly bled out of the account. At the time, he claimed he was paying non-refundable deposits to custom lumber mills and specialized plumbing contractors. I looked at the withdrawal dates. I looked at the date the luxury loft was purchased. A sum of exactly $145,000 had vanished from my joint account through a series of cashier checks made out to obscure vendor names. That exact same amount appeared as the down payment on the loft deed just 14 days later. He had literally stolen the roof from over my head to buy a luxury playground for his affair. I was entirely absorbed in building a spreadsheet of the fraudulent transfers when my phone vibrated against the concrete counter. It was an automated system alert from the old residential security company we used to employ at the marital home. Action required. The subject line read, "Your cloud storage archive is scheduled for permanent deletion in 30 days due to inactivity. Please download any necessary files." He had been so arrogant, so entirely consumed by his victory that he had never bothered to migrate the administrative rights of the smart home system out of my email address. I still held the master digital keys to the house I was legally barred from entering. I clicked the link and logged into the cloud server. I was presented with a digital grid containing hundreds of thumbnail videos, perfectly categorized by date and camera location. I did not care about the recent footage. I utilized the calendar filter, jumping backward in time to the precise 3-week window leading up to the preliminary divorce hearing. I selected the camera positioned in the kitchen, the one that captured the large quartz island where we used to eat dinner. I clicked on a file timestamped at 8 o'clock in the evening, exactly 2 days before the first court date. The video loaded in crisp, high-definition color. The ambient microphone picked up the sound perfectly. I watched my ex-husband pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor, holding a stack of legal papers. My sister was sitting on the bar stool, sipping a glass of wine, and standing directly between them, acting as the director of this grotesque theater production, was my biological mother. "You are hesitating too much," my mother said, her voice echoing clearly through the speakers of my laptop. She pointed a sharp finger at my ex-husband. "If you look down at your hands when you talk about her anger, the judge will think you are making it up. You have to look the judge directly in the eye. Make her sound colder. Declan, you have to use the word terrifying. Tell them you were genuinely afraid of what she might do." My sister laughed. A sharp, metallic sound. "Just remember the script, darling," she purred, reaching out to stroke his arm. "Mom is right. Caroline is a machine. She only cares about contracts and money. If we paint her as a corporate psychopath, they will not even look twice at the bank statements. They will just want to punish her." "I can do it," he replied, nodding slowly. "I just need to make sure I sound entirely broken when the lawyer brings up the audio recording." "Exactly," my mother agreed, patting his shoulder with maternal affection. "We will all corroborate the exact same story. She has always been toxic. We are just finally bringing it to light." I did not scream. I did not cry. I sat absolutely paralyzed in my desk chair, bathed in the blue light of the monitor, watching my own family actively rehearse my assassination over and over again. I watched the clip 3 times. I watched my mother adjust my sister's posture so she would look more like a tragic, concerned sibling. I listened to them meticulously weaponize my dedication and my personality, turning my entire life into a fabricated weapon to destroy me. I remained completely motionless in the dark until 2 o'clock in the morning. The initial shock slowly burned away, leaving behind a profound, terrifying clarity in my professional life. When a contractor breaches an agreement, you do not throw a tantrum. You gather the indisputable evidence, you calculate the total damages, and you crush them beneath the absolute, crushing weight of the law. I reached for my phone and searched for the contact information of Naomi Sutter. She was not a standard family law attorney who dealt in emotional settlements and custody squabbles. She was a vicious, highly specialized corporate litigator who focused exclusively on complex financial fraud and perjury. I did not want to call her because I was heartbroken. I was calling her because the court had previously ruled against me based on an emotional narrative they believed to be true. Now, the narrative was dead. I held the corporate registry, the financial ledgers, the stolen deposits, and a high-definition video of their criminal conspiracy. I finally possessed the one thing that no judge in the country could possibly dismiss as a bitter wife's paranoia. I had a flawlessly documented, hermetically sealed chain of hard evidence, and I was going to use it to tear their stolen world completely apart. Naomi Sutter did not offer me a tissue when I walked into her meticulously organized office. She did not tilt her head or offer sympathetic platitudes about the tragic dissolution of my marriage. She simply plugged the encrypted drive I handed her into her secure terminal, reviewed the newly acquired property deed, scanned the corporate registry, watched the kitchen security footage, and steepled her fingers. "This is no longer a standard family law matter, Caroline," Naomi stated, her voice as flat and unyielding as a sheet of tempered glass. If we can definitively prove they fabricated the timeline, concealed liquid assets, and coordinated witness perjury, this is a textbook case of fraud on the court. We are not just reopening a finalized settlement. We are dropping a bomb on a judicial decree. My entire career at Blue Mesa Infrastructure Partners was built on structural integrity, on identifying microscopic stress fractures before a massive bridge could collapse. I applied that exact same methodology to the wreckage of my own life. Naomi and I commandeered a massive whiteboard in her conference room and began constructing a chronological timeline. We pinned the exact month the clandestine affair initiated. We marked the precise day the limited liability company was quietly registered with the state. We tracked the corresponding dates. The massive sums of cash inexplicably vanished from the joint home improvement account. We highlighted the afternoon the manipulated voice recording was submitted into evidence. And we circled the morning my parents placed their right hands on a Bible and lied to a sitting judge. It was no longer a messy, emotional family dispute. It was an architectural blueprint of a criminal conspiracy. Naomi immediately contracted a highly specialized digital forensics expert to dissect the damning audio file that had crippled my defense during the initial hearings. The results were absolutely devastating. The expert produced a detailed sound wave analysis demonstrating that the recording was not a single, continuous outburst. It was a digital Frankenstein. It had been meticulously spliced together from 3 completely separate conversations. The official report noted that the background frequencies violently shifted mid-sentence, jumping from the acoustic hum of a moving vehicle to the hollow, distinct echo of a tiled bathroom. They had quite literally cut and pasted my spoken words to manufacture a violent threat that never existed. The financial paper trail yielded even more damning structural evidence. Naomi issued a subpoena to a freelance accountant who had briefly managed the books for my ex-husband's boutique design studio during its supposedly bankrupt phase. Under the heavy threat of a legal deposition, the accountant willingly surrendered a series of highly irregular ledgers. They revealed that my sister had been receiving exorbitant monthly payments categorized as brand consulting fees long before the divorce was ever formally discussed. It was a crude but highly effective money laundering loop. He was systematically siphoning corporate revenue to build their secret joint war chest, deliberately crashing his own studio's valuation on paper while simultaneously crying poverty to the court. Then, a completely unexpected witness materialized. We managed to track down a young woman who had briefly worked as my sister's personal assistant. She had been abruptly and ruthlessly fired exactly 1 month prior to the divorce filing. When Naomi interviewed her in a sterile coffee shop, the assistant nervously admitted the real reason for her sudden termination. She had accidentally opened an unlocked tablet left on a desk and discovered an entire hidden gallery of intimate photographs featuring my sister and my husband. These photos were taken inside the very same downtown loft they later claimed in court was just a temporary rental. She possessed specific dates, verified times, and a lingering, highly useful resentment for being wrongfully terminated. But the absolute apex of the evidentiary chain, the single detail that transformed my lingering familial grief into cold, prosecutorial focus, involved my parents. Naomi initiated a deep forensic audit of the corporate accounts connected to the newly purchased loft, buried beneath layers of obscure shell transactions. She unearthed a massive wire transfer issued directly from the design studio's corporate account to my parents' joint checking account. The transfer was executed exactly 10 days before they took the witness stand to testify against my character. The memo line on the digital transfer simply read, "Repayment for family loan." However, there was absolutely no promissory note, no prior record of an initial loan, and no logical reason for a struggling artist to hand a small fortune to his wealthy in-laws. It was not a repayment. It was a calculated financial incentive. It provided a stark, undeniable motive for their devastating, coordinated perjury. I did not stop with the financial documents. I spent my evenings systematically contacting the periphery of my old life. I reached out to former colleagues, old neighbors, and mutual acquaintances who had quietly distanced themselves after the public scandal. Stripped of my pride and operating with the clinical detachment of a lead investigator, I asked them specific, targeted questions. A former neighbor confirmed seeing my sister's car parked in our driveway overnight on multiple occasions when I was traveling out of state for work. A former drinking buddy of my husband confessed to hearing him brag loudly at a local bar that if he played his cards perfectly, he would walk away from the marriage with enough cash to fund his entire next chapter. As the thick, heavy binders on Naomi's mahogany desk multiplied, the lingering, phantom pain of the betrayal completely dissolved. I looked at the towering stacks of sworn affidavits, forensic reports, and banking ledgers. The profound realization hit me with the force of a freight train. My true power in this agonizing ordeal did not reside in my capacity to suffer. It did not lie in showing the world how deeply they had wounded my heart. My absolute, undeniable advantage was that I was the only person involved in this entire sordid narrative who actually knew how to process raw chaos. They had relied entirely on messy emotions, theatrical courtroom tears, and whispered, unverified lies. I relied on the immutable laws of structural engineering and contract law. I was taking the shattered, disorganized ruins of my life and forging them into a weaponized, interlocking system of hard evidence that absolutely no one could ever deny. Naomi Sutter did not just file a motion, she launched a legal missile. On a damp Thursday morning, she officially submitted the petition to reopen the divorce settlement to the county court. The filing rested aggressively on 3 reinforced pillars of evidence: the deliberate concealment of material marital assets, the submission of digitally manipulated audio evidence, and the orchestrated staging of witness perjury designed specifically to defraud the judicial system. It was a masterpiece of legal aggression, designed to trap them from every conceivable angle. It took exactly 4 hours for the shockwave to hit. I was sitting at my desk at Blue Mesa, reviewing a massive municipal transit contract, when my cell phone began to violently vibrate against the mahogany wood. It did not stop. It was a relentless, chaotic barrage that signaled the absolute collapse of their carefully constructed sanctuary. First came my mother. Her voicemails were a frantic, breathless loop of hysterical sobbing. She demanded to know why I was doing this to them, why I was stubbornly digging up buried graves when everyone else had supposedly moved on. Then came my father. He did not cry. He left a singular, booming voicemail, his voice thick with a terrifying rage I had rarely heard. He accused me of being a vindictive, heartless corporate drone who was actively trying to bankrupt her own flesh and blood just to prove a point. Finally, Eva called. I actually answered that one, morbidly curious to hear the untouchable golden child completely lose her composure. "You are completely destroying the very last chance this family has to survive," Eva shrieked into the receiver. The polished, sophisticated socialite facade entirely shattered. "We are already drowning in debt. Caroline, are you happy now? Are you finally satisfied that you are ruining my life just because you could not keep your husband happy?" I hung up the phone without uttering a single syllable in response. I simply placed the device face down on my desk and returned to my contract. 10 minutes later, a long, rambling text message arrived from Declan. He did not dare call, likely terrified that I was legally recording him this time. The message read like a desperate public relations statement written by a cornered, panicked man. He told me that the past was the past. He accused me of acting out of pure, unadulterated bitterness because he had found true, authentic happiness with someone else. "You are an incredibly successful, wealthy woman now," he wrote in the final, pathetic paragraph. "A woman in your secure position should know how to let things go and move forward with grace. Do not stoop to this level of petty, destructive revenge." I read his words twice. A profound, chilling realization washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins. In all of the screaming, the crying, and the frantic text messages, not a single one of them had actually denied the allegations. Nobody said they did not lie. Nobody said they did not hide the money. Nobody denied staging the audio. They simply defaulted to the exact same psychological tactic they had utilized my entire life: They completely ignored the absolute truth and immediately attempted to drag me back into the role of the villain in their twisted, self-serving reality. The crime was not the perjury, the manipulation, or the grand theft. The ultimate crime was my absolute refusal to remain a silent, compliant victim. The pressure campaign rapidly escalated over the weekend, transforming into a synchronized emotional assault. On Sunday evening, my father was rushed to the local emergency room with mild chest pains. It was diagnosed by the attending physician as a minor stress-induced angina, and he was released the very next morning with a standard prescription for blood pressure medication. However, the extended family immediately weaponized the hospital visit. My phone was suddenly flooded with hateful, vitriolic messages from second cousins and distant aunts whom I had not spoken to in over a decade. They accused me of literally trying to give my own father a fatal heart attack. They wielded his fluctuating blood pressure as the ultimate moral cudgel, acting as if his physical decline was the direct, undeniable result of my legal filing, rather than the natural, exhausting consequence of spending years frantically covering up Eva's spectacular financial and personal failures. I sat in Naomi's office the following Tuesday afternoon, looking at a particularly vicious email from an aunt who casually called me a sociopath. I felt a brief, dangerous flicker of the old, familiar guilt trying to take root in my chest. It was muscle memory, a conditioned response to decades of being told I was the problem. Naomi noticed my hesitation. She leaned across her pristine desk and tapped her silver pen sharply against the glass surface, snapping me back to reality. "This is exactly what victory looks like. Caroline," she said, her voice sharp, grounding, and devoid of any pity. "When people know they are completely losing on the factual evidence, they always pivot to attacking your morality. They cannot fight the bank statements. They cannot fight the corporate registry. And they certainly cannot fight the digital forensics. So, they are trying to drown you in manufactured guilt. It is a sign of absolute, unmitigated panic. Do not let them pull you back into the emotional mud. We stay on the concrete." Her words anchored me. The storm outside was howling with unprecedented fury. But inside the ironclad framework of evidence we had built, I was perfectly safe. The sheer terror radiating from the opposing side became undeniable 2 weeks later, during the crucial preparation phase for the new preliminary hearing. Declan's highly theatrical attorney, the very same confident man who had aggressively waved that fabricated psychological evaluation in my face 2 years prior, suddenly reached out to Naomi requesting an urgent, off-the-record settlement conference. We met in a neutral, windowless conference room in a downtown arbitration center. The atmosphere was completely different this time. Declan looked physically ill. His skin was pale. His designer suit looked slightly too large for his frame, and he could barely maintain eye contact. His attorney did not perform any theatrical stunts or raise his voice. He was sweating slightly under the harsh fluorescent lights. The offer they pushed across the table was an act of sheer desperation disguised as a compromise. They proposed an immediate, legally binding termination of my monthly spousal support payments, effective that very afternoon. In exchange, they demanded that I permanently withdraw my motion to reopen the case, sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement regarding the hidden assets and the limited liability company, and bury the damning evidence of their perjury forever. They wanted to quietly sweep the massive fraud under the rug, offering me a minor financial break to buy my absolute silence. Declan finally looked up at me, his brown eyes pleading and pathetic. "Just take the deal, Caroline. You get your money back from today onward. We all just walk away quietly and get on with our lives. It is the most logical, practical thing to do. You have always loved being practical." He still thought he knew me. He still thought I was just a human calculator, driven entirely by the bottom line and desperate for a peaceful resolution. He fundamentally misunderstood the entire architecture of my retaliation. I looked down at the thick settlement document resting on the polished wood table. 2 years ago, I would have signed it immediately just to stop the bleeding, just to escape the suffocating weight of their collective lies. But I was no longer the broken woman who had walked out of that courtroom feeling hollowed out and erased. I had rebuilt myself using steel and concrete. "I decline," I said, my voice steady, calm, and echoing clearly in the quiet room. Declan's lawyer flinched visibly. "Hamilton, if we proceed to court with these allegations, the legal fees will be astronomical for everyone involved. The media might pick it up. You are acting out of pure emotion." "I am acting out of absolute precision," I corrected him, standing up slowly from my leather chair. "I do not want a quiet, polite exit. I do not want to save a few $1,000s a month in exchange for my permanent silence. I want the original verdict publicly overturned. I want every single fabricated lie formally ripped out of the judicial record by a sitting judge." I looked directly at Declan, holding his gaze until he physically looked away. And then I looked at the empty chair beside him where Eva should have been sitting. "For my entire life," I said, my tone colder than the winter air outside, "my family has been able to close the living room doors and decide amongst themselves what the official truth is going to be. They decided Eva was perfect, and they decided I was merely a useful tool. They decided I was an abusive monster, and they decided you were a tragic victim. Those days are permanently over. A judge is going to look at the undeniable proof in open court, and the real story is going to be written into the public record. There are no more closed doors." I turned and walked out of the conference room alongside Naomi, leaving the desperate settlement offer unsigned and untouched on the table. The storm was finally breaking over their heads, and for the first time in my existence, I was not desperately looking for a shelter. I was the one bringing the lightning. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4 swung open. It was the exact same room, smelling faintly of lemon floor wax and old paper, but the atmosphere had fundamentally mutated. The judge sitting at the elevated mahogany bench was the Honorable Margaret Sterling, the very same woman who had signed away my home and my assets 24 months prior. The air in the room was dense, practically humming with a suffocating, static tension. Legal professionals in the gallery whispered among themselves, leaning forward in the polished wooden pews. Everyone understood the unspoken, terrifying rule of the justice system if you manage to successfully deceive a sitting judge. You must pray they never discover the truth. If they do find out they have been used as a pawn in a fraudulent scheme, there is absolutely no mercy to be found. Naomi Sutter did not begin our petition with a tearful narrative about a shattered marriage or a scandalous familial betrayal. She bypassed the emotional theatrics entirely. Instead, she unrolled a massive, pristine white presentation board and placed it directly in the center of the room. "Your Honor," Naomi began, her voice ringing out like a struck iron bell, "we are not here today to litigate a broken heart. We are here to expose a meticulously executed financial crime." She tapped a silver laser pointer against a complex financial flowchart. She walked Judge Sterling step by agonizing step through the establishment of the limited liability company, the timeline of the vanished renovation funds, and the exact dollar amount of the commercial loft deposit. She placed my ex-husband's sworn affidavit of poverty, dated from our original hearing, right next to the public property deed proving he had quietly purchased a luxury estate just weeks later. The judge leaned forward, her reading glasses slipping down the bridge of her nose, her expression hardening into a terrifying, rigid scowl. Next, Naomi called our digital forensics expert to the witness stand. He was a dry academic man who spoke entirely in technical certainties. He projected a massive sound wave graphic onto the courtroom monitors. He explained, in agonizing, undeniable detail, how the supposedly terrifying audio recording of my voice had been artificially manufactured. The background acoustics radically shift at the 4-second mark. The expert testified under oath, pointing to a jagged spike on the graph. The first segment contains ambient noise consistent with a moving vehicle. The final segment, where the respondent appears to make a threat, was actually extracted from a completely different recording environment with distinct tile acoustics. Naomi then played the unedited, original source file we had miraculously recovered from my archived cloud backups. It was not me screaming at my husband in a fit of abusive rage. It was me sitting in my home office, aggressively reading the financial penalty clauses of a corporate roofing contract over the phone to a negligent vendor who had damaged my property. A heavy, collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Then came the fatal, cinematic blow. Naomi introduced the recovered security footage from my former kitchen. The courtroom monitors flared to life. The high-definition video played in absolute, dead silence, save for the ghostly voices echoing from the past. There was Eva, tossing her golden hair and practicing a look of profound, fabricated tragedy. There was my biological mother, standing in the center of my own kitchen, actively directing the perjury. "You are hesitating too much," my mother instructed from the screen, pointing a sharp finger. "Make her sound colder. Declan, you have to use the word terrifying." And then, Declan's voice filled the room, laced with a casual, sickening laugh. "As long as she sounds controlling, that is enough." Judge Sterling's face turned a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. She stared directly down at the respondents' table. Declan and Eva sat completely frozen, their spines rigid against their chairs, the color rapidly draining from their faces until they looked like porcelain statues. Naomi did not give them a single second to breathe or regroup. She immediately called the freelance accountant to the stand, sweating profusely in his cheap gray suit. The accountant verified every single financial allegation under the terrifying threat of a perjury charge of his own. He confirmed that Declan had actively funneled pre-divorce revenue into the secret joint venture with Eva. He admitted to maintaining a secondary, hidden ledger specifically designed to mask the rapid accumulation of capital. This testimony instantly obliterated the carefully crafted narrative of the exhausted, bankrupt husband. It legally transformed a messy divorce proceeding into a premeditated conspiracy to commit property fraud. The tension reached a boiling point when Naomi called my father to the stand for cross-examination. He looked small, incredibly frail, and utterly terrified as he swore on the Bible. Naomi did not yell. She utilized a quiet, surgical precision that was far more devastating than anger. "Did you ever, on any specific date, personally witness your daughter enact physical or emotional violence against her husband?" Naomi asked, stepping out from behind the podium. My father gripped the edges of the wooden witness stand. He looked at me for a fraction of a second, then looked away, his jaw trembling violently. "No," he finally whispered, his voice cracking. "I just trusted that Eva knew better. Eva told us how bad it was, and we believed her." In 2 brief sentences, my father had entirely vaporized the moral foundation of their entire case. He had confessed on the public record to damning his own daughter based on nothing but blind, foolish favoritism. The absolute silence in the courtroom following his admission was deafening. Eva desperately tried to maintain her polished, stoic composure when it was her turn to testify. But Naomi knew exactly where the structural weaknesses were located. During Eva's cross-examination, Naomi projected a blown-up screenshot of a text message exchange between Eva and a mutual friend, sent mere days before the initial divorce filing. "Caroline has always been the workhorse." Eva had typed in the message. "She has earned money her entire life. At least this time. She should pay for something fun." Eva's pristine, untouchable mask completely shattered. She opened her mouth to argue, her face flushing a deep, angry red, but she could not formulate a coherent legal defense. The entire courtroom looked at her, entirely stripped of her glamorous victimhood. They saw exactly what she truly was, a calculating, deeply cynical parasite who viewed my existence as nothing more than an automated teller machine. She was not a woman swept away by an uncontrollable romance. She was a thief who harbored a deep, calculated contempt for her own sister. In the final, desperate moments of the hearing, Declan was forced onto the stand. He was completely cornered, stripped of his protective layers of familial lies and fabricated evidence. In a frantic, reckless attempt to salvage any remaining shred of sympathy from the furious judge, he leaned into the microphone. "I never meant for it to go this far," he pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. "I was just trapped in a miserable situation, I was following my emotions. I fell in love, and my emotions simply took over my judgment. Naomi stepped fully into the center of the room, walking slowly toward the witness box. Her eyes were as cold and unforgiving as a winter ocean. "Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register that demanded absolute attention. "What specific emotion requires a person to establish a secret limited liability company? What emotion drives a man to intentionally conceal hundreds of thousands of dollars in material assets? What kind of emotion meticulously splices digital audio files to frame an innocent woman and actively rehearses witness perjury in the victim's own kitchen?" Declan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He stared blankly at the polished wooden railing. He looked frantically at his attorney, but his lawyer simply stared down at his legal pad, for the very first time since the day he walked out of my life. My former husband had absolutely nothing left to say. The court recessed for exactly 45 minutes. During that time, I did not pace the hallway, nor did I anxiously review my notes with Naomi. I sat perfectly still on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, listening to the muffled, frantic whispers radiating from the opposing counsel's consultation room. When the bailiff finally called us back inside, the atmosphere had undergone a violent, irreversible shift. When Judge Sterling returned to the elevated mahogany bench, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet to freezing. She did not shuffle her legal pads or clear her throat. She stared directly down at the respondent's table with a gaze so severe and unforgiving that the entire gallery fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The overwhelming evidence presented before this court today demonstrates unequivocally that the original judgment handed down in this room was not the result of a simple misunderstanding or a standard marital dispute, Judge Sterling announced. Her voice echoed off the dark wood paneling like the sharp crack of a whip. It was the direct result of an organized, malicious, and highly calculated fraud perpetrated against this institution. She did not hesitate for a single second. With a few sharp, legally binding sentences, the judge completely dismantled the elaborate prison they had spent months building around me. She immediately struck down the existing spousal support order, permanently terminating any future payments to Declan. But she did not stop at simply stopping the bleeding. She officially reopened the equitable distribution of our marital assets from the ground up. She ruled that the vast sums of money I had been legally forced to pay over the past 2 years were extracted from a poisoned judgment, thoroughly infected by fabricated evidence and coordinated lies. Because both my former husband and my sister were proven by digital and financial records to be active, willing participants in creating this elaborate deception. The judge held them jointly and severally liable. They were legally ordered to repay the entire balance of the spousal support I had previously surrendered. The judge instituted a strict court-mandated collection schedule that would garnish their rapidly dwindling business accounts. Furthermore, they were ordered to cover every single cent of my substantial legal fees, as well as the exorbitant invoices from our digital forensics expert, because their direct criminal actions had necessitated the investigation. Then, the judge addressed the stolen home renovation funds. Because the court now formally recognized that my joint savings had been fraudulently siphoned into their secret corporate entity, I was awarded complete restitution. I was to be compensated for the severe property damages and stolen capital that I had not even fully comprehended I had lost at the time of the initial divorce decree. The most devastating, earth-shattering blow, however, was reserved for my parents. Judge Sterling gathered the heavy transcripts containing their sworn affidavits and original testimonies into a neat, terrifying stack. She looked right past Declan and locked her eyes directly onto Eva. "I am officially forwarding the testimonies of your parents, along with the corroborating video and financial evidence, to the local district attorney's office," the judge stated, her tone devoid of any mercy. "They will conduct a formal review regarding multiple counts of perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud." Eva's face instantly drained of all remaining color, leaving her looking sickly, hollow, and suddenly very old. Judge Sterling leaned forward, delivering the final, crushing sentence of the hearing. "Family is not a license to defraud the court." The the heavy wooden gavel slammed down, finalizing the total destruction of their lies and officially closing the session. I stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored blazer, and walked out of the heavy double doors into the harsh fluorescent light of the courthouse corridor. They were already waiting for me. My mother was weeping uncontrollably. Her expensive mascara was smeared beneath her eyes, and her hands were shaking violently as she clutched her designer leather purse. The pristine, untouchable matriarch of the Hamilton family was entirely shattered by the sudden realization that her wealthy social circle was about to watch her be investigated by the district attorney. "Are you finally satisfied, Caroline?" my mother sobbed, her voice cracking under the crushing weight of her impending legal disaster. "Are you happy now?" Next to her, Eva practically growled. The sophisticated, charming socialite mask was completely gone, replaced by the desperate, vicious snarl of a cornered animal. "You ruined absolutely everything," she screamed at me, her fists clenched at her sides. I stopped walking and looked at them. 2 years ago, I would have felt the desperate, agonizing urge to defend myself. I would have wanted to argue my case, to logically explain my pain, to beg them to finally understand my side of the story. Today, I felt nothing but a cool, detached, and beautiful silence. I did not need to argue with them anymore. The undisputed truth, backed by forensic science and financial ledgers, was already perfectly documented in the official court transcript. I simply looked at their tear-stained faces, offered absolutely no response, and walked right past them. Just as I reached the elevator bank at the end of the long hallway, I heard rapid, desperate footsteps echoing on the marble floor behind me. It was Declan. He looked entirely broken. His designer suit suddenly looked cheap and poorly fitted on his slumping frame. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He stepped directly in front of the elevator doors, blocking my path, holding his hands up in a pathetic, pleading gesture of surrender. "Caroline, please wait," he begged, his voice trembling with a sickening mixture of fear and exhaustion. "Let us just talk about the repayment schedule privately. I cannot afford those forensic and legal fees right now. The studio is completely bankrupt. Eva is completely out of control, and I never actually had any real power over her or the business decisions. I thought I was managing the situation, but she manipulated me too. She is destroying me. Please, I am begging you, talk to your lawyer and give me a softer deal." I stood perfectly still and looked straight into the brown eyes of the man I had once loved with my whole heart. I searched his panicked face for the brilliant, calculating mastermind who had almost successfully destroyed my entire life. I found absolutely nothing of the sort. In that freezing, illuminating moment, I realized a profound and pathetic truth. He was not a criminal genius who had skillfully manipulated everyone around him to steal my kingdom. He was just a profoundly weak, incredibly greedy man. He had foolishly believed he could control a chaotic, destructive force like my sister, simply because he was arrogant enough to choose the wrong ally out of pure entitlement. He was not a monster. He was just a coward who had played a high-stakes game and spectacularly lost. "Move out of my way, Declan," I said softly, my voice carrying the absolute finality of a closing door. He swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping in defeat, and he slowly stepped aside. The elevator doors chimed and opened. I stepped inside and turned around, watching his defeated figure grow smaller as the heavy metal doors slid shut, separating us forever as the elevator descended toward the ground floor. I realized I did not feel the intoxicating, loud, adrenaline-fueled rush of a cinematic victory. There was no booming soundtrack playing in my head, and there was no cheering crowd waiting for me in the lobby. Instead, I felt a strange, beautiful, weightless sensation settling deep into my bones. I had accomplished something far more significant than merely reopening a finalized legal case and reclaiming my stolen financial assets. I had successfully reopened the authentic version of myself. I was not crazy. I was not cold. I was not a toxic, domineering monster who drove people away. I was simply a highly capable, intelligent woman who had finally refused to accept the narrative written for her by selfish people. I had forced my entire family to pay the ultimate public price for attempting to turn me into their convenient sacrificial lamb. The following Monday morning, the sky over Charlotte was a bright, piercing blue. I walked back into the glass-walled executive suites at Blue Mesa Infrastructure Partners, holding a cup of strong black coffee. I had a massive, multi-million-dollar municipal transit contract waiting on my immaculate desk, filled with complex risk liabilities, vendor guarantees, and structural demands. I loved the precise, undeniable logic of the paperwork. I sat down in my comfortable leather executive chair, opened my laptop, and took a deep, steadying breath of the cool, air-conditioned air. My personal cell phone, resting on the corner of my mahogany desk, suddenly lit up. The screen displayed an incoming call from an unknown local number. Given the events of the previous week, I knew exactly who it was. It was a panicked relative, a desperate ex-husband, or a crying mother looking for a loophole. I did not decline the call, nor did I answer it to deliver a final, dramatic speech. I simply picked up the device and placed it face down on the polished wood surface, silencing the vibration entirely. It was a remarkably small, effortless motion. But as the screen went dark against the desk, it felt exactly like cutting the very last heavy iron chain binding me to my past. I pulled the first stack of dense legal documents toward me and picked up my silver pen. I genuinely no longer cared who in my family still loved me, who secretly hated me, or who was desperately preparing to beg for my forgiveness. None of it mattered anymore. For the first time in my entire existence, the person I finally chose to stand beside, the person I chose to protect above all others, was the most powerful person in my life myself. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Please leave a comment down below and let me know where you are listening from so we can interact and share our thoughts together. Do not forget to subscribe to the Olivia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support me further by hitting that hype button so the story in this video can be heard by even more people.